The rain started before sunrise. By the time we reached the cemetery, the sky had turned a dull, unforgiving gray, the kind that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. The air smelled of wet soil and lilies. I stood beside my father's casket, barely hearing the priest's voice over the sound of rain hitting black umbrellas. My father wasn't just a parent. He was the founder of Harrison Tech Industries, a self-made man, a visionary. But to me, he was the man who stayed up late helping me understand balance sheets, who believed I would one day take his place not because I was his son, but because I had earned it. And now he was gone. As the casket slowly lowered into the ground, something inside me felt like it was collapsing with it. My hands trembled, but I kept my head high. Dad always said, strength isn't about not feeling pain. It's about standing through it. Standing just a few feet away was Daniel, my stepbrother. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly composed. Too composed. He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, but I hadn't seen a single tear fall. His jaw was tight, not with grief, but with something else. Calculation. The company executives stood behind us, whispering quietly. Investors. Board members. All watching. Because this wasn't just a funeral. It was a transition of power. Everyone knew my father had been grooming me for leadership. I had worked in every department for 10 years, from operations to finance. I had skipped vacations, missed birthdays, sacrificed relationships. Not for money. For legacy. As the ceremony ended, people approached me one by one offering condolences. You'll do great things. Your father trusted you. The company is in good hands. Each sentence carried expectation. Daniel remained silent. When the crowd began to thin and the umbrellas closed, he finally walked toward me. His shoes pressed into the wet grass, leaving sharp imprints behind. He stopped close enough that I could see the faint smirk he was trying to hide. Hard day, he said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. Then he leaned closer, too close. Enjoy today, he whispered. Tomorrow, everything changes. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? I asked. He straightened his tie, stepping back with a calm expression. You'll see. Before I could respond, he turned and walked toward a sleek black car waiting at the cemetery gates. He didn't look back. I stood there long after everyone else had left. Rain soaking through my suit. Shoes sinking into mud. Something felt wrong. Dad had always warned me about ambition without loyalty. He believed blood didn't guarantee character. I watched the last car disappear down the road and felt an uneasy truth settle in my chest. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a war. And I had a feeling I was about to lose everything. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel's words kept replaying in my head. Tomorrow, everything changes. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the heaviness hadn't. I put on my sharpest suit. If this was the first official day without my father, I intended to walk into Harrison Tech Industries with strength. The headquarters building stood tall and reflective, just like Dad designed it. Glass walls symbolizing transparency, integrity, vision, values he lived by. As I walked through the revolving doors, something felt off. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes. 2 security guards stood near the elevators. And Daniel was waiting in the lobby. He wasn't dressed in black anymore. No sign of mourning. Just a tailored navy suit and a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. Morning, he said casually. Daniel, I replied. We need to discuss succession plans with the board. He let out a short laugh. Oh, we're discussing something. One of the security guards stepped closer to me. I frowned. What's going on? Daniel held up a thin leather folder. Dad made some changes before he passed. Legal changes. A cold sensation spread through my chest. What changes? He opened the folder and pulled out a document. I'm afraid your services are no longer required. For a second, I thought I misheard him. My services? I repeated. Daniel, I'm the Chief Operations Officer. He corrected. He handed me the document. My eyes scanned the page. Termination notice. Effective immediately. Signed authority. Daniel Harrison, acting CEO. This is a joke, I said, my voice rising. Dad would never. He did, Daniel interrupted smoothly. He appointed me temporary decision-making authority during his final weeks. That's impossible. I was in every meeting. Not everyone. The words hit like a punch. Around us, employees pretended not to stare. I could feel their eyes, their whispers. Humiliation burned hotter than grief. I helped build this company, I said through clenched teeth. I gave 10 years of my life. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. You were an employee. That's all. And right now you're unemployed. The security guard cleared his throat. Sir, we need your badge. I stared at him. You're escorting me out of my own father's company? Company policy, Daniel replied coolly. Slowly, I removed my access badge and placed it in the guard's hand. It felt like handing over a piece of my identity. As they walked me toward the doors, memories flashed through my mind. Late nights in the office with Dad, strategy sessions, expansion plans, the pride in his eyes when we closed our biggest deal. Was all of that meaningless? The revolving doors spun again, and suddenly I was outside. No office, no authority, no father, just the cold wind and the realization that Daniel had played this perfectly. From the glass lobby, I could see him speaking confidently to the staff, smiling, taking control. He looked victorious. But something didn't sit right. Dad wasn't careless. He was strategic. And as I stood there staring at the building we built together, one thought cut through the anger. If Daniel thought this was the end, he didn't know my father at all. The silence in my apartment was unbearable. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have emails waiting. No strategy meetings. No late-night reports. Just quiet. And humiliation. I loosened my tie and dropped into the couch, staring at the ceiling. 24 hours ago, I was preparing to lead my father's company. Now I was locked out of the building like a stranger. Daniel's voice echoed in my mind. You were an employee. That's all. Anger tightened my chest, but beneath it was something worse, doubt. Had I missed something? Had Dad really changed his mind? No. That didn't make sense. My father was many things, but he was never impulsive. Then I remembered. A week before he passed, I had visited him in the hospital. The machines beeped steadily around him, but his eyes were clear, focused. He asked the nurse to leave the room. From the drawer beside his bed, he pulled out a thick sealed envelope. Keep this safe, he told me. Open it only if things don't go the way you expect. I frowned at the memory. At the time, I thought it was just legal paperwork. Estate details. Something routine. I had placed it in my desk drawer when I got home and completely forgotten about it. My heart started pounding. I stood up immediately and walked to my home office. My hands shook as I opened the drawer. It was still there. Cream-colored. Heavy. My name written on the front in Dad's handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at it. Opening it felt like admitting that Daniel had won. But not opening it felt worse. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter and several official documents. I unfolded the letter first. If you're reading this, it means Daniel showed you exactly who he is. My breath caught. I love him, but I don't trust him with what we built. I needed to be sure. Sure of what? My eyes moved faster across the page. I've structured the company in a way that protects you and the legacy if he ever tries to remove you. My pulse thundered in my ears. I grabbed the legal documents next. Stock transfer agreements. Trust declarations. Signatures. Not just copies. Original filings. The more I read, the clearer it became. Dad hadn't left the company vulnerable. He had built a safety net. And Daniel had just triggered it. A slow, almost dangerous calm settled over me. This wasn't a termination. This was a test. And Daniel had walked straight into it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the final page, the clause that made everything shift. If I was ever removed from my position without unanimous board approval, control would automatically transfer. Not partially. Majority control. My father hadn't just prepared for betrayal. He had engineered the response. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Daniel thought he had taken everything from me, but he had just handed me something far more powerful: leverage. And tomorrow, I wouldn't be walking back into that building as an employee. I'd be walking in as the majority owner.
Fire.
I didn't sleep that night, but this time it wasn't from anxiety. It was from clarity. The documents were spread across my desk: trust agreements, share certificates, legal filings stamped and dated months before my father's death. He hadn't made a last-minute emotional decision.
He had planned this. Carefully. Strategically.
I read the numbers again to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding them. 51% of Harrison Tech Industries had been transferred into an irrevocable trust. Beneficiary me. Daniel owned 19% directly in his name. The remaining shares were split among long-term investors, none holding more than 5% individually. But that wasn't the real bombshell. It was the clause buried near the end of the trust agreement. If I was terminated without unanimous board consent, an automatic emergency voting consolidation would activate, temporarily transferring an additional 30% proxy control to me for executive protection. Total voting power? 81%. Daniel didn't just fire me. He handed me absolute control. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady now. Dad hadn't chosen between us. He had tested us. And Daniel failed within 24 hours. I picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted outside the family, Mr. Carter, my father's longtime corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. "I was expecting your call," he said calmly. "So you knew," I replied. "Your father insisted I prepare everything in advance." He said, and I quote, "If Daniel removes him after I'm gone, it means he values power over blood." A sharp silence followed. "He fired me yesterday," I said. "I assumed as much," Carter replied. "Which means the protection clause is now active." 81%, I whispered. "Yes." Even hearing it from him felt unreal. "When can we move?" I asked. "Immediately. We'll file notice for an emergency board meeting. Legally, they cannot refuse." A slow exhale left my lungs. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like the grieving son. I felt like my father's successor. "Daniel thinks he won," I said quietly. Carter's tone hardened slightly. "Then let him enjoy it for one more day." After the call ended, I stood and walked toward the large window in my apartment. The city lights flickered below. I thought about my father, his discipline, his patience, his belief that leadership was earned through character, not entitlement. Daniel had always chased titles. I chased responsibility. That was the difference. My phone buzzed with a company-wide email notification. From Daniel Harrison, Acting CEO. Subject: New Leadership Direction. I opened it. He thanked employees for their support, mentioned necessary restructuring, and emphasized a bold new era. I almost laughed. He had no idea that era was about to end. I closed the email and picked up the trust documents one more time, sliding them back into the envelope carefully. Tomorrow, we would notify the board. Tomorrow, Daniel would see the signatures. Tomorrow, the security guards who escorted me out would stand behind him instead. Dad once told me, "Revenge isn't about anger. It's about timing." And the timing was perfect.
Fire.
I didn't storm into the company the next morning. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't post anything online. Revenge isn't loud. It's strategic. At exactly 8 a.m., Mr. Carter filed the formal activation notice of the trust clause with the corporate registry and sent certified copies to every board member of Harrison Tech Industries. By 8:17 a.m., Daniel received his copy. I imagined his confidence as he opened the envelope. Then I imagined the moment it faded. At 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was one of the board members, Ms. Reynolds. "Is this real?" she asked without greeting. "Yes," I replied calmly. "All documentation has been legally registered." There was a long pause. "He terminated you without consulting the board," she said slowly. "We were informed after the fact." "I know." Another pause. "Then the protection clause applies." "Yes." Her tone shifted, not hostile, not friendly. Respectful. Will attend the emergency meeting. By noon, confirmation emails came in one by one. Daniel couldn't stop it. Legally, he was required to attend. I spent the rest of the day reviewing financial reports, the same reports Daniel now had access to, but barely understood. He had always been more interested in appearances than operations. The numbers told a story. Short-term decisions. Risky vendor changes. Cost-cutting in departments Dad had always protected. He was already steering the company toward instability. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. I let it ring once.
Twice.
Then answered. What do you want? He snapped immediately. I leaned back in my chair. I think the better question is what you're going to say tomorrow. Silence. Then a forced laugh. You think a few old papers scare me? They're not old papers, I said evenly. They're legally binding instruments signed by Dad and notarized months ago. His breathing changed slightly. You're bluffing. If I were bluffing, the board wouldn't have confirmed attendance. That hit him. He didn't respond for several seconds. You've been planning this, he said finally. No, I corrected him. You did this the moment you fired me after Dad's funeral.
His voice hardened.
You don't understand how this works. I understand perfectly. 81% voting control. The silence on the other end told me everything. He knew now. You think this makes you powerful? He asked bitterly. No, I replied. It makes me responsible. I ended the call before he could respond. For the first time since this began, I felt completely steady. Daniel had relied on shock and humiliation to weaken me. But he underestimated something critical. Preparation beats ego. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next day. By law, once my control was verified, Daniel's authority would be suspended immediately pending vote confirmation. He had enjoyed his moment in the lobby. The smirk. The power. The security escort. Tomorrow, we'd be in the boardroom. And this time, I wouldn't be the one being escorted out. Fire. The morning of the emergency board meeting, tension hung over Harrison Tech Industries like a storm cloud. Employees whispered in the hallways. Phones buzzed constantly. Even the security guards seemed to move slower, aware that history was about to unfold within these walls. I arrived early, dressed sharply, carrying only the documents that my father had entrusted to me. Every step toward the glass doors felt like a countdown to vindication. Daniel was already inside, pacing near the boardroom table, muttering under his breath. His confident facade had cracks, tiny ones, but they were there. As I entered, the room fell silent. Every executive, every board member, every employee watching on video feeds sensed the clash about to happen. Daniel's eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty there. He tried to mask it. I trust everyone knows why we're here, he said smoothly, forcing a smile. This is just a formality. I set the trust documents on the table, letting the thick envelopes make a subtle but weighty statement. Formality, I echoed softly.
Yes.
That's exactly what this is. The chairman of the board, a man I'd known since my internship, cleared his throat. Let's review the situation calmly. Daniel jumped in immediately. This is absurd. My father would never. The documents are notarized. I interrupted, my voice steady. All filings are registered months ago. The trust clause activates automatically if an employee is removed without unanimous board consent. That employee is me. Voting control automatically shifts. 81%. Legally binding. A tense silence fell. Even Daniel's lawyers looked nervous. He opened his mouth to argue, but the chairman raised a hand. Daniel, please. He tried again. These papers, they're just paperwork. They're more than paperwork, I said, leaning forward slightly. They're authority. They are your limit. And they are my right. I watched his face go pale as he realized the truth. For all his power plays, for all his arrogance, he had walked right into a plan decades in the making. My father had thought of everything. The board began to vote. One by one, members confirmed the validity of the trust documents and the automatic transfer of voting power. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel's hands shook slightly as the final vote was tallied. The chairman's voice rang out, clear and decisive. It is official. Mr. Harrison now holds 81% of the company's voting power. Daniel froze. His smirk vanished. He looked smaller, weaker, completely unprepared for the consequences. The employees watching on video feeds could feel the shift. The balance of power had changed. I sat back, my expression calm. No need to gloat. The documents had spoken for themselves. Daniel realized, finally, that he was no longer in control. Effective immediately, the chairman continued, all executive decisions will require Mr. Harrison's approval. Daniel's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His carefully constructed facade of dominance had collapsed under the weight of my father's foresight. I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. No, Daniel, I said softly, almost kindly. It isn't me. It's your choices that failed you. For the first time, I felt the shift fully. I wasn't just reclaiming my father's company. I was honoring his legacy, enforcing justice the way he always would have wanted. The boardroom had witnessed the quietest, most complete takeover imaginable, and Daniel had no one to blame but himself.
Fire.
The moment the boardroom vote was finalized, the atmosphere in Harrison Tech Industries changed instantly. The tension that had been simmering for days finally erupted into a palpable energy, quiet but undeniable. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of authority settle over me. 81% of the company was mine. Daniel's reign was over. I watched him struggle to maintain composure. His hands were clenched tightly on the edge of the table, knuckles white, and his usual arrogance had evaporated. The smile he always wore like armor was gone. For the first time, he looked small. Daniel, I said evenly, my voice carrying across the boardroom. You've had your time. It's over. He shot me a glare, one that tried to mask the fear creeping through his chest. This isn't over, he spat. I built this company too. I deserve respect. You built nothing, I interrupted calmly. You destroyed trust. You tried to remove the person your father trusted most. You fired me after his funeral. That wasn't leadership. That was betrayal. The senior executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even some of Daniel's loyal supporters avoided his gaze. They had seen the documents. They knew exactly what had just happened. The chairman of the board, standing at the head of the table, cleared his throat. Effective immediately, Mr. Harrison holds the majority voting power. All decisions will require his approval. Daniel Harrison is relieved of acting CEO duties until further notice. Daniel's face drained of color. The reality of the situation hit him like a punch. The same security guards who had escorted me out just days before now stood silently behind him, a living reminder of his misjudgment. Please collect your belongings, one of them said politely, yet firmly. He hesitated, staring at me as if willing me to falter. But I remained calm, unshaken. The humiliation he had tried to inflict on me was now his own. Pride, unchecked and greedy, had a way of backfiring. I don't need your sympathy, Daniel muttered bitterly, picking up a box of personal items. I shook my head slightly, almost pityingly. This isn't about sympathy. It's about justice. And your choices brought you here. As he walked out of the boardroom, every step echoed like a countdown to his defeat. Employees who had quietly witnessed the entire takeover were already whispering, some even smiling. They understood the shift in power. The company wasn't just safe, it was in the right hands. I leaned back, letting the tension drain from my body. Daniel had underestimated me. He had underestimated the foresight of my father. And now, his arrogance had cost him everything. It wasn't about revenge in the moment. It wasn't about rubbing his face in it. It was about taking control of what was rightfully mine and ensuring that the company my father built would continue to thrive. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The storm had passed. The battle had been won, quietly, strategically, decisively. Daniel had walked in thinking he had all the power. Now he had nothing. And I had everything.
Fire.
The following week, Harrison Tech Industries felt different. The tension that had gripped every corner of the office began to ease. Employees whispered less, Meetings were calmer, and even the investors seemed relieved. They had been watching closely, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. I stayed in my office, reviewing reports and emails, but not obsessively. My father's trust documents had secured my position, and the board had confirmed everything. The power shift was complete. Yet, there was one conversation I hadn't had, with the executives who had worked alongside Dad for decades. That morning, one of Dad's senior executives, Ms. Reynolds, knocked and entered without waiting for an invitation. She carried a file, but her eyes were on me first. "You've handled this well," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But I didn't do it alone. Dad planned everything." She nodded slowly. "Yes, he did. And Daniel, well, he always had ambition, but he never had the restraint your father valued. He cared more about titles than the company's legacy." I leaned back in my chair, listening. Every word confirmed what I had suspected. Daniel's fire for control had blinded him, but Dad had foreseen it all along. "You know," Ms. Reynolds continued, "your father spoke about you often in these last months. He said you were patient, strategic, and committed. He trusted you completely. And he wanted to make sure that if Daniel ever tried to overstep, the company and your father's vision would be protected." I felt a lump form in my throat. Dad had not only prepared me for this moment, he had prepared the company. His foresight wasn't just for revenge, it was for protection, for legacy. Ms. Reynolds set the file down on my desk. "These are some of the internal notes and observations your father made. Reading them will give you insight into his thoughts about Daniel's weaknesses and your strengths." I opened the folder carefully. Pages filled with meticulous notes, evaluations, and personal observations, a roadmap for leadership, guidance for protecting the company, and subtle warnings about Daniel's tendencies. "He knew," I said quietly, almost to myself. "He knew everything Daniel would do." Ms. Reynolds smiled faintly.
Yes.
"And that's why the company is safe now, because you understand more than just the numbers. You understand the values." I closed the folder and took a deep breath. Daniel may have thought he had won by firing me after Dad's funeral, but the truth was, he had only triggered a plan years in the making. Dad had turned what seemed like a loss into a powerful safeguard. "The company, it's not just surviving," I said. "It's stronger than it was before. Thanks to him." "Yes," Ms. Reynolds replied. "Your father always believed that character was more important than ambition. Daniel ignored that lesson. You didn't. That's why you're here and he's not." I nodded. Finally, the storm had cleared. The truth was out. Daniel had revealed his true colors, and my father's wisdom had ensured that I would be the one carrying his legacy forward, with integrity, strategy, and patience. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not from revenge, not from power, but from justice. And the knowledge that my father's vision would continue, safeguarded against anyone who dared underestimate it. Fire. A few weeks later, Daniel showed up at my office. He hadn't called ahead, and I wasn't expecting him. The knock on the door was tentative, almost hesitant, but I recognized the signature tension in his posture immediately. "Come in," I said calmly, setting aside the documents I'd been reviewing. I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't smile. I just looked at him, steady, controlled, unshaken. He stepped in and closed the door behind him, the click echoing in the quiet room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes darted around the office, taking in the subtle power shift. My position at the head of the room, the framed certificates, the organized chaos that was unmistakably mine now. I wanted to talk," he muttered, his voice tight. "About what?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated, then blurted out. "You ruined me. You took everything from me. This company, my career, my reputation." I leaned back slightly, hands clasped. "I didn't ruin you," I said slowly. "You ruined yourself the moment you fired me after our father's funeral." His face twisted with disbelief. "That's not fair. I was acting in the company's best interests. You were acting out of ego," I corrected him. "You weren't thinking about the company. You were thinking about yourself. Titles, power, control. That's not leadership. That's tyranny. He swallowed hard, and for the first time, I saw him as small and vulnerable, stripped of the confidence that had always made him intimidating. Pride had been his shield, and now that shield had shattered. "I don't understand," he said, voice quieter now, almost pleading. How did he?" "Your father planned this," I said. "Every step. Every safeguard. He knew your nature, Daniel. He knew what you would do. And he prepared for it. The documents, the trust, the voting power, all of it was designed to protect the company and me. You just played right into it." Daniel's shoulders slumped. His jaw tightened. He looked defeated, finally seeing the consequences of his actions. I stood and walked around my desk slowly, stopping just short of him. "I'm offering you one last chance," I said, my tone steady but firm. "You can stay in the company, in a role that contributes, without threatening the legacy Dad left behind. Or you can leave, and the consequences of your choices will be yours alone." He looked up at me, pride and regret warring in his expression. I can't do that," he admitted. "Then leave," I said. "With dignity, if you still have any left. Don't burn bridges unnecessarily. Pride is expensive, Daniel. And right now, it's costing you everything." He turned silently, gathered his things, and walked toward the door. His steps echoed in the empty office, a stark reminder of his defeat. As the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled slowly. The tension that had been building for weeks finally eased. The company was secure. My father's legacy was intact. And Daniel had learned, the hard way, that timing, patience, and strategy always win over arrogance. For the first time in weeks, I felt a profound calm. Victory wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was quiet, deliberate, and absolute. And it was mine. Fire. Months passed, and Harrison Tech Industries began to thrive like never before. The early chaos after my father's funeral and Daniel's betrayal had given way to stability, growth, and renewed confidence among employees and investors. The company was no longer just surviving, it was stronger than it had ever been. Sitting in my office one morning, I looked out over the city skyline, sunlight glinting off the glass towers. The view felt symbolic, a reminder of what had been lost, what had been fought for, and what had been preserved. My father's vision was alive. His principles were intact. And I was the one entrusted to carry it forward. Daniel had vanished from the company entirely. Some former employees whispered about his failed attempts to start another venture, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Harrison Tech Industries had survived the greed and betrayal that had once threatened to consume it. I picked up the trust documents my father had left behind, flipping through them one last time. I had read them countless times, but now they felt less like legal tools and more like a testament, a message from him. He had prepared not just for my success, but for my integrity, my patience, and my ability to honor the legacy he had built from the ground up. It struck me then how different revenge can be from justice. Daniel had expected me to fight with anger, to humiliate him, to seize power with bitterness. But Dad had taught me a far greater lesson. Revenge doesn't have to be loud or destructive. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and inevitable. The employees who once whispered now approached with respect and trust. Board members sought my counsel. Investors felt secure. And I realized the most powerful revenge isn't about causing pain. It's about proving competence, patience, and vision. One afternoon, as I walked through the office, I overheard a conversation between two junior employees. "I can't believe how much has changed," one said. "The company feels alive again." "Yeah," the other replied. "And all because the new leadership actually knows what it's doing." I smiled quietly, keeping my presence subtle. My father had always believed in actions over words, and now so did I. That evening, I returned home and found the same envelope my father had given me months ago. I didn't need to open it. I knew every word by heart. I set it on the table, a silent reminder of the man who had prepared me for everything, including betrayal, grief, and ultimate responsibility. For years, Daniel had thought power was a title. He had learned, too late, that power without vision, patience, and strategy is meaningless. I had inherited far more than shares in a company. I had inherited a legacy of wisdom, foresight, and resilience. As night fell, I sat back in my chair, reflecting on the journey from the funeral to this moment. The grief, the humiliation, the betrayal, all of it had shaped me. All of it had led to this outcome. And I realized that true victory isn't measured by what you take from others, but by what you protect, build, and honor. Harrison Tech Industries was no longer just my father's company. It was ours, the company he trusted me to lead. And in that quiet, deliberate triumph, I felt the kind of fulfillment that no revenge could ever mimic. The legacy lived on. And so did I, Fire.